When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: What my father kept. User: Fortunate Son 49. Posted July 17, 1996.
I was halfway down the attic ladder when the box broke and the photos spilled across the hallway like a hand of wet cards. They hit the floor, slid under the radiator, stuck to my shoe, and the first thing I did, God help me, was whisper, "Sorry, Dad," like I'd dented his workbench instead of scattering pieces of his life across the floor. The house smelled like disuse. Old plaster, dry wood, paper dust. I turned on every lamp to fight the gray, but the light still felt thin. The funeral had been 2 days ago, a short service at St. James, closed casket, 2 men from the plant, a few of his church friends, survived by his loving son. That was me. My mother's been gone 15 years, no siblings. I was the last of the line. I crouched, sorting the photos. Most were harmless. Dad at the grill in his old Sears apron, me as a kid holding a fish, the Buick half buried in snow. But a few looked wrong. A shoulder of highway at night, lit by flash, a rain-slick mailbox, the torn interior of a car seat, dark stains on the vinyl. I stacked them carefully and turned to the box. It was labeled in his familiar handwriting, Taxes, 1978 to 1983. Typical Dad. The man never threw away a receipt, but under the Polaroids were 2 stacks of driver's licenses, each rubber banded together, dozens of them, all women, different names, different states. The first band broke in my hands. I held up one card under the light. State of Arkansas driver license. Photo was of a young woman, expiration 1984. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Lost wallets maybe? Old job. Something. Then I found the grocery bag. Folded, taped shut, labeled faintly in pencil, Keep. Inside were 3 rings, plain bands, initials etched inside. One had a heart, one had a cross, one only a date, 8/12/82. I didn't touch them again, just washed my hands at the sink until they stung and told myself I'd misunderstood. In the next box, labeled Maps, I found what finished the job. He collected road maps for decades, always tracing routes before a trip. These were marked too, but the folds opened to lonely back roads, the margins notated in pencil, dates, sometimes an X, sometimes nothing. The old news sound started replaying in my head. Stories from the kitchen TV when I was a kid, the missing girl from Poto, the woman whose car was found by the laundromat. Dad would shake his head and say, "The world's full of bad sorts." And Mom would tell him to turn the channel. I went to the garage because I couldn't sit still. His workbench was exactly how he'd left it. Pegboard tools and neat outlines, drawers full of coffee cans, screws and tape. In the bottom drawer, under a pile of Christmas wrapping paper, was a ledger. The pages were columns, dates, towns, names. Some I recognized. The handwriting was steady, deliberate. He'd press hard enough that the indentations carried through the paper, and that's when it hit me. Not all at once, but like a slow leak filling the room. These weren't lists of bills or chores. They were a record. I found the tapes next. A small lockbox under a trunk of winter clothes, 14 cassettes labeled by date and number. I carried one to his bedroom, the same place the hospice nurse had said he took his last breath. The tape player on the nightstand still worked. At first, there was road noise, turn signal, radio fuzz, and then his voice, low and humming the way he did when he concentrated. A woman's voice followed, nervous, friendly. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Shortcut," he said. "I grew up here." Silence, then her laugh, small, uncertain. "It's darker than I thought," he said. "Won't be long." The tape hissed, then stopped. I stared at it until my reflection looked like a stranger. After that, I didn't move for a long time. The house creaked inside, and I realized the sound of him had never really left. It was just buried under all the things he'd kept. I bagged what I could. Maps, photos, rings, the ledger, the tapes, and I carried them to the car. Tied the trash bag so tight it squealed, and I told myself it was just paper and plastic and proof that grief makes you paranoid. But I knew better. Outside, the cold air smelled clean in a way that felt wrong after that attic. Dad had planted daffodils along the fence when I was little. Foolproof flowers, he called them. They'd bloomed early this year, yellow and soft against the frost. At the end of the row was a bare patch of soil that never grew anything. He used to call it the dead strip. I stared at it for a long time, but didn't dig. When I was small, scared of the dark, he'd sit in my doorway with his feet in the light and his back in shadow. "What do we do when we're afraid?" he'd ask. I'd say, "We listen." He meant for the house to explain itself, the wind, the pipes, the branches scraping the gutter. I tried that now. The wind hummed through the fence. A car passed on the road beyond. Far off, a train called through the night. Inside, the radio I'd left playing found one of his old songs, the kind he'd whistle through his teeth. It hit me then. Those missing persons stories from my childhood weren't strangers to him. They were entries in a ledger. I stood there until I couldn't feel my fingers, then went inside and made a list the way he would have. Call detective, bring ledger, don't forget rings, say the dates. Under it, I wrote for myself, "You're still a son, do the right thing anyway." But I didn't call. Not yet. I drove. The road split left toward the station, right toward the reservoir where he taught me to drive. I turned right. The water shimmered like oil in the moonlight. I pulled over in the same spot where he'd once said, "You've got good hands for this." The trunk creaked when I opened it. The bag sat there, heavy and ordinary. I thought about how easy it would be to drive to the quarry, drop it in, and let the water take the rest. Pretend my father was what I told myself he was. Quiet, decent, stubborn, unremarkable, but the truth has a gravity. It keeps pulling. I shut the trunk, drove home, and parked in the driveway where the daffodils leaned toward the porch light. I went inside, touched every switch, turned off every lamp. At the table, I set the note beside my keys and stared at it until the words blurred. Do the right thing. I wanted to believe there was a version of right thing that didn't destroy everything, that I could love him and still tell the truth, that being a good son didn't mean keeping his secrets. The night settled into silence, the kind that holds its breath. The house groaned once, the way old houses do, and I thought I heard his whistle rise up from somewhere beneath the floorboards. Thin, tuneless, patient. The sound of a man organizing something you don't want him to.
Subject: after the divorce. User: Sentinel123. Posted September 23, 1997.
I never really noticed the little things until after the divorce. When the kids were with me, the house felt full, loud, chaotic, the way a house should be. But during the week, when it was just me, every sound felt like it had its own shape. The refrigerator hummed, the heater clanking awake, the ice settling in the freezer. Stuff I'd never paid attention to suddenly felt amplified in the empty spaces. That's probably why the driveway light caught my attention the first time it came on. I woke up, glanced at the clock, saw 3:17 a.m., and rolled back over. I figured it was a raccoon, or maybe the wind. Didn't think twice, but the next night, it clicked on again, right at 3:17, bright enough to cast a soft glow across the bedroom wall. And the next night, it did the same. By the fourth night, I was awake before it happened, lying there in the dark with the kind of quiet that makes you strain your ears for things you aren't sure you want to hear. When the light snapped on, the room lit up just slightly, like someone had cracked the door open from a hallway. The hairs on my arms stood up, and for the first time, I wondered what exactly kept triggering that sensor every night at the exact same minute. I got out of bed and peeked through the blinds. The driveway was empty, just frost gleaming faintly under the yellowish light. No movement, no animals, nothing at all. The silence outside was so total, it felt staged, like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. I told myself it was probably the temperature, the wiring, or any number of things that wouldn't require me to start imagining something strange, but that explanation, it didn't sit right. Not when the timing was that precise. The next morning, I took a ladder out of the garage and checked the light fixture. The sensor looked old, but intact. The wiring wasn't exposed or frayed. It turned on when I tapped the casing, off when I backed away. Nothing seemed wrong enough to justify replacing it, but the predictability of that nightly flicker stayed with me all day, even when I was trying to focus on work or thinking about what I'd cook when the kids came back for the weekend. That afternoon, when I found an old VHS security camera and a recorder and a box of office supplies, I set them both up in the living room window. It was a stupid impulse, the kind that comes from nerves you don't want to admit you have, but something in me needed proof. I aimed the camera out at the driveway and let the tape run overnight. When I rewound it the next day, I fast-forwarded through hours of nothing. Cars, one stray dog, headlights passing on the far end of the street until the timestamp hit 3:17. The floodlight snapped on, filling the tape with a soft amber glow. But here's the thing. There was something lying in the driveway. I leaned closer to the screen, squinting. The image was grainy. Old cameras always record darkness like it's underwater, but the shape was absolutely unmistakable. It was long and curled slightly. Too skinny for a person, too stretched for any animal I'd ever seen, like someone had taken the outline of a body and pulled it at the edges. Underneath it, a dark area spread slowly across the concrete, like moisture blooming outward. 54 seconds later, the light went off, and when it came back on in the next frame, the driveway was empty again. I told myself the tape was clearly degrading. Old analog film does strange things, but the knot in my gut didn't buy that explanation. The shape wasn't random, it wasn't a glitch. It had weight, it had intent. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the couch with all the lights off, waiting for the moment. When the driveway light finally blinked on at 3:17, the glow seeping into the living room through the blinds, I didn't go to the window. Not yet. I just listened, holding my breath. The house was quiet, too quiet. Even the heater seemed to sense something was off, and after a minute or so, I finally stood up and slowly pulled the blinds back. There was nothing there. Just frost and silence and light. But it felt wrong, like whatever had been lying there on the tape had simply curled out of sight the moment the light triggered. 2 nights later, I woke not to the light, but to a sound. Soft tapping on the front door, light, delicate taps like fingernails brushing against wood. It wasn't a knock. A knock is purposeful. This was exploratory, curious. I held still, listening. The driveway light was already glowing. The tapping went on for another few seconds, then slid into a slow scrape along the siding, like someone dragging their fingers down the wall, feeling for something. I grabbed the old aluminum flashlight from the junk drawer, heavy enough to swing it if I needed to, and approached the door. The closer I got, the colder the air felt, as though the heat wasn't reaching that part of the house. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Nothing. Just the driveway lit up with that washed-out yellow. But as I kept watching, something at the very edge of the lens, just outside the door frame, moved. Not a person, not an animal, a smear of motion shaped in an ungodly way, sliding quickly up the porch steps and out of sight. I backed away and didn't sleep at all. At sunrise, I went outside to check the driveway. Frost covered everything except for one long oval patch in the center where the ice had melted entirely. The concrete was damp, like something warm had been lying there for a long time. Drag marks, thin, uneven streaks, led from the melted patch into the side yard, disappearing into the bushes. After that, I started keeping a pattern. Whenever the kids weren't with me, I stayed awake until the light came on. Every night, 3:17, I'd sit in the dark with the flashlight clutched in my hand, listening to the house breathe around me. And some nights, the light stayed on barely a minute, while other nights, it stayed on longer, glowing strangely, almost flickering like something was walking back and forth near the edge of the sensor. One evening, instead of tapping on the door or scraping the siding, I heard breathing through the mail slot. Not a normal breath. This was ragged and wet, labored in a way that made my skin crawl. Something was drawing air through lungs that didn't sound fully functional anymore. I stayed absolutely still until it stopped, and in the morning, the drag marks were back. Closer this time. They reached the porch and disappeared beneath the wooden steps.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.